Ciao, welcome to Beatspot. I'm Marco, and in this video I'm walking you through a remix for Uchis Moonlight that I just did. So let's go through some tips and techniques that I employed in this production. So I started with the Acapella and I basically just downloaded the full track and exported it with an AI tool. So now let's see how I did it. So you can either purchase the full track, the original master, or you can download it with Demix, which is this application that downloads tracks from the Deezer server. It doesn't have all the tracks, but generally the most popular ones. I mean, it's really hard to not find something on here. Maybe upcoming artists, something like that, you can just not find them, but if we just go Uchis Moonlight, we have all these versions. You just click here and it will be added to your queue. Once we have that, we can use an online tool like Vocal Remover. There's also La AI and many others. So just let's look at it. So Vocal Remover free. And here we have a bunch of them. So free online vocal remover, Nota, Voice AI, AI, Media. So my go-to at the moment is vocal remover. So I'm just going for the vocal removing.
I just wanna get high on my love. Veo una muñeca cuando miro en el espejo. Kiss.
And once you've done, you just go to save and you have music, vocal and music plus vocal, but music plus vocal doesn't make sense unless you mix them, but it doesn't make sense. So we just take the vocal. We can also take the music for alignment purposes if you want to sample something, but that's it. So now let's just import the music and the vocal into the DAW and we just align them. Sometimes these kind of tools add some silent at the beginning, sometimes the vocal and the music aren't aligned. This isn't the case, but I had other tracks that presented that problem, and I mean you have to make everything in sync to kind of start well, otherwise you're just going into spiral where nothing sounds good, everything you make is shit. And so my tip for this is import them, turn off the warp on both things, find the original BPM and then hit warp again. So it will warp anchoring to the original BPM. Otherwise it's just a bit offset. It tries to guess the original BPM and it stretches. Yeah. Now let's talk about the pitching. So for vocals, my favorite method of pitching is going here. We just enable the warp and we go to Complex Pro and turn the formants down and turn the formants all the way down. So we have the vocal like this.
I just wanna get high on my love. Veo una muñeca cuando miro en el espejo. Kiss. Looking dolly eye. Think I may go out tonight. I just wanna ride, get high in the morning.
If we have the formants all the way up, it just has like those high-end artifacts that makes it sound a little too ripped off, while turning them down makes the vocal rounder, smoother, and I like it that way. We can also try like tones. Beats is not great for vocals unless they are rapped, but in general I just don't like it. I just go with these ones that are like more musical. So drums, something I really like to do on drums, I program them with the drum rack. This is a recent workflow of mine and I think it's way better than just using individual samples. I use audio samples only for top loops, for fill loops and for crashes, because I want to use the clip fade for the crash and kind of shape it to my own taste and to the needs of the track. But one other thing I like to do is using the drum bass right after the whole rack. So here we have the drums. Let's turn off everything and even the reverb, the slapback. So these are the drums. So I know there's a boost in volume. I don't really care when I'm producing. I can just turn the whole fader down later. Sometimes I find that the boost is kind of welcome because it just level them too low. So I just keep it that way and eventually fine tune the track with the volume fader. Just gets you to the point way quicker. So I just have to work generally with the drive, the crunch, and the transients, and sometimes the damp too. So the crunch is great because it brings out the snare especially, but also the top end, the high end cymbals and all that stuff. So if your drum loop sounds quite dull, you just use the crunch and you're good with it. So for the damp, this is mainly for kind of harsh resonances from the cymbals, from the tops. Just don't try being too surgical with any cue. Try these first because it's more intuitive. You're just moving without looking too much into the graphs and visuals, and you find what sounds good. Then we have the transients. So basically when you turn it up, you are just turning the sustain up, and when you turn it down, you are turning the sustain down, so it's tighter. So here we have a squashed version, and here we have like a more dynamic version. And you can really see how easy it is to set up the initial sound for a drum kit this way. And then you can just process with other stuff. Then there's the drums room. So I like to wash my drums a bit with this kind of chain. So I take the low end off the very beginning of the return tracks. Then I go with the Console 7 Cascade and drive it hard before the reverb. And then I fine-tune the whole spectrum with an EQ8. And I like to use this Console 7 Cascade to make the whole reverb sound bigger, because I can just turn it down later and keep a lower reverb volume, but consistent, so it's like a nice floor for the ambience of my drums. And then there's this slapback. So it's just that I just type slapback into the browser and use this one, and I think like if we go slapback, so I just turn down the feedback and like tweak the filter a bit, and that's it. And I turn the dry wet all the way up because of course it's on a return track, and that's basically it. This is the result. So if we listen to it in solo, it can be a bit annoying, especially if we don't have the reverb, but the reverb is kind of masking it a bit. If we turn this sync, this delay offset down to 0, we have it centered, and we can also eventually kind of cut the high end. It's a bit annoying, it's a bit too obvious in this case, but with the reverb it just makes the drums thicker. So to me, without this lapback, the drums sound like they are falling short for like just a bit. It's not really something that I notice when I listen to a record, but when I'm producing it and turning on and off, I can just hear the difference and see that it's a subtle yet important like contribution to the drum sound. So they make them a bit more dense across the time, so we are just delaying and we have more time filled. That's not like a necessity for every track, for every mix, but just try it and try to keep it like very low volume. You can see if it works or not for your case. One thing I really like about the drum rack is the option of layering drums within a single track. So here I have the drums and here's the kick, so let's solo it. So it sounds like a kick, but I just layered an hi-hat to make it like spike a bit more. Let's listen to it in context. So without the hi-hat, sounds like the hat tag has been smoothed out a bit. What I did is just like loading and hi-hat of my preference and EQ it like this. So I just got rid of everything that sounded below. Here we have all these useless low end and leveled it accordingly. I did the same with the snare, so here we have this snare from a drum loop and then here's this clap. And originally I was using this other snare, but after listening to it a couple of days, it just sounded off to me. This is my default, my go-to snare for my templates, but in this case it didn't work. So what I really like about the drum rack is that I can also A and B versions of the same instruments without like having to do too much stuff or like committing to a specific sound. So in this case I still have old snare here, but then I proceeded with layering and found this solution. So if I just want to listen back to my old snare, I can just hit the solo button and kind of switch between them. And that's great workflow wise, because you want to go faster, you want to kind of see if you are doing the right thing, and if you want to compare with an old choice of yours, you don't have to do much work to do that. You just click a button and see, am I going the right way? Am I going in the way I meant to? Yes, no, you make your decisions and go on. So for the open hi-hat, this has been a game changer because it's one of the most important sounds in a drum groove for this genre. I started with this hi-hat, which is my go-to for my template, but then I switched to this. A great tip for making this kind of music on the open hi-hat is to just like chop it, so let's see it. So when selecting the length of your hi-hat, you just zoom in, and so this one is the open hi-hat, and this is the time before the kick and snare hit back. So here we have 182 milliseconds, and so I went here in the sample land. You generally have samples by default, but if you right click, you can just see the seconds, and we can also see like a grid down here, but it's not as accurate. So I went like here and had like an idea of where I wanted the hi-hat to cut off. So this technique allows the drum to bounce a bit more, and you can keep it loose or tighter and having like more bounce. It's up to you. In this case, I generally like to do this kind of trick because it makes everything bounce a bit more. So crashes, they are like important. They set how the drop hits, a new section hits, and I work on them with audio clips. So let's look at it. So this is the crash, and it's basically the layering of these two. So this one sounds fatter, fuller, and I like it. And this is how I did it. I just went with the utility to narrow it down a bit because it was too wide for my taste. Then I used the EQ8 to kind of like EQ it. And as you can see, it's too harsh, there's too much mess, but it's clean. I mean, it isn't ear piercing. And then here I have these delays. So Ableton audio effect rack in parallel, I have the delay like this. I like doing it like this because I can level the delay with the beat. Makes more sense to me rather than just going with the dry wet only. So the delay sounds like a sort of splash. And then I have the reverb. So I just have this default preset from RC24 and call it a day. I know that this reverb is going into the drums room reverb, but I want the crash to be more reverbered, and it's not really a problem to have a double reverb in this case. I'm just using the reverb here as a sound design tool, so I'm good with it. For the melody, the bass line, chord progression, you name it, I just went online and found them for a remix. So it's like this. You just look for like Kali, Uchis, Moonlight scale or chords, and there's this website Hook Theory, which is really great, but we also have other stuff. So let's we have Ultimate Guitar, and that's nice if it's like a rock song with guitars, etc. You can gain some useful insight. But then we have Chordify, which is this other thing, so you can just play it and see all the notes, and the same goes here, and in this case you can also like look at the melody or the chords. And I mean, let's listen at them. I will just mute, so let's play it. I will just mute the audio for copyright reasons. So here we see the melody, and these are the chords, and they are also noted here and here. So I mean, that's like a really nice insight. You also have the key, you can see the guides to see the notes in the scale. Here we have some other stats, we don't really need them. And that's great because you can come up with a whole different music for your mix. Sometimes it sounds great, sometimes you have the right inspiration, other times you are just lazy, you are just brain farting, you can just come up with anything nice. I mean, it's a remix and you can still keep the same stuff and rework it a bit and still sound like a remix. By having this same kind of music, you're just changing the drums, the sounds, the effects, the BPM, so it's not a crime to reuse the same chord progression. So here we have the Reese Bass, and sounds like this. So this is a preset of mine, and it's really simple. Here we have the saw wave with the fundamental cutoff, and the same thing goes for this other oscillator. And so I have some unison here, some other unison for this other one. This oscillator B is turned up by an octave. So this one is giving the grid and this other one is like giving the detuned sound. I have this MG low filter. And to keep the sound a bit more analog, I have the noise automating, the noise oscillator automating the filter, so you can see how it's like glitching here. And I also have the note moving, so the cutoff moves respecting the played note. And then here's like some distortion. And the post filter is really important. Then some multiband compression. A bit of EQ to cut the muddiness, and then the filter gain, which is making a huge difference. But in my original preset I have the sub enabled just because I want to sketch everything out, but I usually split it, just turn it off and keep the sub here. It's a sine wave like this, we have the random in 0, I mean, usual sub-bass stuff. If you plan to do pitch bends, you have to kind of set these accordingly on both patches. So if you do pitch bends, you might generally want to go to +12 to -12, because +2, -2, it's like a sort of settings that you might want to keep for live performances because you don't want to go too wild with the pitch wheel. But when producing, you are in full control of what's happening at what time, so you can just draw the pitch bend automation. As for the post-processing, so here I have this tremolo that's going on and off based on the section. So here in this case I have this pumping. In this section, so we have that bounce in the low end. I have this other chain for sections like this, which is the bridge and the build up, and I'm distorting it with the overdrive. I'm reverberating it heavily with the RC24, which is a small hole reverb, and then filtering it. So with this off, it's dense, it's bassy, while with this chain on, it becomes like a pad. And I like doing this often because I can use the same sound for multiple purposes and keep like almost a pretty coherent tone across all the arrangement. So you just get the sense that it's the same sound, but it's doing something else. So that's it. The high pass is nothing crazy. It's 73 Hz. It's just taking the sub off. A bit is being taken off by the overdrive too, and like not much the reverb, but I mean, it's all a result, the airiness of this pad is all a result of this free processing in series. A nice trick to make your drops pop more is using white noise. So you may have like actually a good drop, but it's not exciting enough, and all you might need is just a bit of noise, in this case sidechain noise, and I just went for this loop, really simple. I processed it this way, which is just in a cue to make it fit the mix, nice pocket. So you can see how more exciting the whole drop is with just this noise. It's not too invasive, but as soon as I turn it off, it sounds a bit bland, it sounds like a bit weak. I like to do this kind of metaphor, which is when you have a DJ set with the big stages and everything. When the drop comes, we have all the steam machines, the fire machines lighting up, and it's playing that kind of role. So just imagine yourself being at EDC or whatever other festival, Tomorrowland, etc., and you have to turn those steam machines up. So for the vocals, especially when remixing, I like to split the verses and the chorus because I generally want and need to process them differently. So here I have the intro, which is just like the second part of the first drop, and then we have these other verses, so I process them in a certain way, and then I have the chorus, which is a bit more processed because it has to fit the whole wall of sound that's playing in the drop. One nice thing I like to do is the harmonic reverb. So I don't have the shimmer verb, which is a plugin that basically pitches your input signal and reverberates it. So you have a sort of harmonic reverb, as I called it here. So I just duplicate the track and then pitch it to taste. In this case, it's at +5 semitones, but considering the original reverb is at -2, it's at +7 semitones, so it's a perfect fifth and like a power chord. So this is what it sounds on its own. This is the original.
I just wanna get higher with my love.
And now let's A and B them.
I just wanna get higher with my love. Veo una muñeca cuando mira en el espejo, looking all the eye, think I may go out tonight. I just wanna ride, get high in the moonlight. I just wanna get higher with my love. Veo una muñeca cuando mira en el espejo, looking.
So it's just adding some top end without much stress on the original vocal, so I didn't want to go with too much excitement, too much like high shelving, high frequency compression, limiting, whatever. Just wanted something that added both space and tone to the sound, and this technique is something that works nice for most of the time, especially when we have this kind of melodic stuff or rapped stuff. it doesn't. Of course, you don't have to keep the vocal like how it's in the original track. It's a remix, so you can play with it a bit, and I did this for the last drop, so I just played a bit with reverb and with delay and did some kind of chopping. So simple as that, it adds like a vibe to the track, and it can be just like a small section, it can be the whole track, it can be 50-50, you decide, and it's nice to kind of play with the vocals and make and reinvent the vocals according to the genre. I mean, the whole production alone doesn't necessarily kind of do justice to the track, but we can just use these tricks. And I also did something similar in the second drop. So I just added some more delay which aren't there in the original track. So here we have this Moonlight going on, and it's creating like a different atmosphere for the tracks, which isn't there in the original. It's not much, but it's that little eye candy that can serve the genre and the remix and the whole thing, okay, nicely. So for the build-up, I like to make them airy and but not too much. So it's kind of a balance, a hard balance to find, but once you find your formula, it generally works for most of your tracks if you are within the same genre. So here's what I do. I generally work with Transit, Endless Mile, and the EQ8 or any combination of those. So in this case, I have the Transit doing this stuff. I actually redesign the preset every time for Transit because I'm dumb. I don't save my preset. I should just go back into my old production, into all my productions, and save the presets so I can recall them easily. But it's also true that this way I'm building a bank of presets, so by the time you're watching this video I will have my own bank, at least I guess so. So I just work with phaser, delay, reverb, filter 12, filter 24, and I have the transition control all the way up in this case. And I'm automating the mix. So I just don't want the effect to move, I just want the effect to come in and come out more. So then I have the Endless Smile with this Smack in the Face preset. I generally use the standard one, the default one, but I mean, you can just explore all the presets. Some of them are really nice and add great variety to like this simple plugin, which does a really simple thing, but it really makes tracks alive. So for the mixing part, for the automation, okay, I have the dry wet at 65% for the Transit. I have the Endless Smile at 0.33. It's not much, but it's enough because otherwise it washes up the whole mix. The individual sounds aren't much intelligible anymore. So you just want a bit of hype, but not too much. And then we have the EQ8. So for the EQ8, I'm doing this thing. So it's basically a low shelf cut of 6 dB, and I automate the scale parameter. And in this case, I could have like automated the gain alone, but the huge pro of using the scale is that anytime I want to kind of automate by how much the EQ8 is cutting or boosting, whatever, my sound, I don't have to touch the automation. I just move the gain knob. So let's see, I decide that I want the automation to go to minus 12 dB. I just don't have to touch that. I just move this gain knob and I'm good with it. If I want to move, if I want to add something like an high shelf, I just add it and call it a day. Okay, so everything is moving as planned with a single or like 2 clicks, and I don't have to recall or keep in check too many automation lines. So this is like a really great tip by a time saving standpoint. So when working with build-ups, drums play a nice part, but we have to work on them also. Like we just don't have to program them, we also have to mix them. And a nice trick I like to use all the time is this one. So I just load a compressor at the very end, and I want to tame the peaks. So I just want to kind of level everything, having it less spiky, blurred out, let's say, because generally in the build-ups you are blurring out the whole track and then bringing back the full focus on the drop. And so I'm doing this. I have this compressor. So really important, it's set at peak because it actually catches the peaks, and I'm moving. I have the attack down to 0, I have a really quick release, and I'm automating the dry wet parameter, so it progressively softens the whole spike, the whole punch in the drums, and make them fade out because before they kick back in. However, you can do this with the transient shaper too, it's up to you. I find that the compressor is like easier to control because I can control the ratio, I can control the threshold, so by how much everything is moving, and keep the dry wet working in the meanwhile. While with a transient shaper, unless it has a dry wet control, but not all of them do, you have to work on how much the attack is moving. So just food for thought, you can do whatever you want. This is just a concept. You can even use like a limiter and lower the ceiling. The concept is taking the transients off before you bring them back into the drum. So a great tip for mono compatibility is mixing inside. So the general tip is to mix in mono, and that's great as well, but if you mix listening to the sides only, you actually get an idea of what it's like feeling the side channel, and that shouldn't be there. When mixing in mono, you focus on what's lacking in the mono channel, and that's good. You have to do that as well, but most of the time you disregard you just blindly mix and don't hear what you're taking off the side channel. So we can just do an MS encoder. In this case, I have this mono side audio effect rack, and I'm making them with the monitoring free by Air Windows. So here I have the mono and here I have the side. So I can listen to it in mono. So listening to the sides only is like an additional perspective you can use to your mixing in mono workflow. So mixing in mono is great, but sometimes you just get too used to how the mono sounds and don't understand what's lacking. And while listening to the side, you just get an idea of how much stuff, especially in the low end, is going on, which is hurting your mix, or at least making it a bit muffled. But you can also hear how much of the sound that aren't there in mono are in the side, and so you can proceed accordingly and move them toward the mono. How do I move a sound to the side to the mono, or vice versa? So there are a few ways. My favorite ones are using Dr. MS by Matthew Lane, and that's like a really advanced tool for mono compatibility issues, for sounds that I really can't like tweak by hand, so I just go with that. Otherwise, I just use a combination of saturation and mid-side EQ. So something like, let's say this one. Okay, here I have this mid-side. So this sound was too wide. Let's listen to it. And this is before. So that's really wide. Let's listen to it in mono only. So what's the reasoning behind these is that I wanted it to be more mono compatible, and so I took most of the sides off, and I used the mid, I used this boost to bring back the high end into the mid channel, and that has been possible because some of the high end was already there, but it was like weak. So boosting it makes sense. It's boosting with the EQ is not necessarily a crime. Let's be clear about that. So now let's move to the last tip of this video. When producing, and especially when mixing, references are crucial. So use references. How do I use them? In this case, I used this reference just to level the kick and the bass. And then I reference to the past versions of the same track. So sometimes it's just for production, but most of the time it's for a mixing standpoint. So I want to recall how far from the previous saved session I went, and this is great. I just bounce all my sessions. So in this case, I has 107, which isn't the 107th time, it's just the 7th. I keep the 1 at the very beginning because if I drastically change the direction, I can proceed to save them to like 201, 202, 203 and branch out without like how can I say that? Without mixing too much the stuff and having a hard time recalling what the previous really different version was. Aside that, I keep my previous mixes into, so here I have a previous version, which sounds like this. And if you don't use the X'd out, it sounds like this. And if you ever wonder why your actual track isn't reaching the same loudness of your reference track, no matter how hard you drive your limiter on the master, that might be because you forgot this thing. So now let's set it back to X'd out. And in this way, I can just compare by how I used to sound to how I'm mixing the track now. And this way I can see where I lacked or how I'm changing the style of the track on purpose. So sometimes I just want to like mix something way softer on purpose, but I also want to try a harder mix, so I can just like match them, compare them, and have an idea, because sometimes it's not a single plugin that makes, or like most of the time isn't a single plugin making the sound, but it's a compound effect of all the tweaks you've ported to the track. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.